Hassanal Bolkiah, the Eternal Sultan of Brunei. Part 1, Birth of a Future Monarch, the Formative Years of Prince Hassanal Bolkiah. On the morning of 15th of July 1946, amid the tranquil surroundings of Istana Darussalam in Brunei town, a royal child was born who would go on to shape the destiny of an entire nation. The boy was named Hassanal Bolkiah Muizzuddin Wadaula, the eldest son of Pangeran Bendahara Sri Maharaja Permaiswara Omar Ali Saifuddien and Raja Istri Pangeran Anak Damit. His birth took place during the reign of his uncle, Sultan Ahmad Tajuddin, and from his earliest days the weight of royal expectation subtly defined his life. Although born into luxury, young Hassanal Bolkiah's childhood was not merely one of courtly indulgence. His father, a man known for his wisdom and foresight, understood the importance of discipline and education in molding a future ruler. From an early age, the prince's daily routine was marked by structured instruction and spiritual grounding. His initial education began at the Istana Darul Hana Surau, a place not only of prayer but of learning, where children of the royal household studied side by side. Among his classmates were his siblings, including Prince Muhammad Bolkiah and Princess Masna, as well as other young members of the nobility. Under the guidance of Abdul Ghani bin Jamil, the Surau became a foundational institution in the prince's intellectual development. Abdul Ghani would later recall the prince as an unusually serious and attentive student. Unlike his peers who ranged in age from 5 to 10, Hassanal Bolkiah stood apart not only due to his position as the eldest, but also because of his early maturity. His interest gravitated naturally towards subjects that demanded analytical rigor: science, history, and languages. Though formal Western education was still in its infancy in Brunei at the time, the young prince showed an appetite for knowledge that reached beyond traditional instruction. In 1955, at just 9 years old, he completed the 3rd grade at Jamalul Alam Malay School in Brunei town. That same year, he transitioned from group lessons to private tuition, under the guidance of Abdul Rahman bin Hai Maud Ja'afar. This individual attention allowed him to make rapid progress, especially in English, in which he became proficient enough to read literature within 3 months. His progression was such that within 4 years, he had reached the equivalent of 6th grade education, a testament to his dedication and intellectual abilities. But academic excellence alone would not suffice in preparing the future sultan. It was vital that the prince understood the traditions, culture, and religious identity of his people. His early years were therefore steeped not only in secular education, but also in Islamic studies. This dual foundation would later influence his vision for Brunei as a modern nation rooted deeply in Malay and Islamic values. At age 15, on 14th of July 1961, a significant milestone was reached. In a grand ceremony befitting the gravity of the moment, Hassanal Bolkiah was officially invested with the title of Crown Prince, Yang Maha Mulia Seri Paduka Duli Pangeran Muda Mahkota. The event was not just a symbolic gesture. It signaled to the people of Brunei and the wider region that the young prince was now the designated heir to the throne. The ceremony also served to initiate the prince into the formal duties and expectations of statecraft. Just over a year later, in December 1962, those expectations would be tested in a dramatic and dangerous way. A rebellion, known as the Brunei Revolt, erupted, aiming to overthrow the monarchy and establish a North Borneo Federation. The young crown prince and his father were placed in immediate danger. British Gurkha troops, led by Lieutenant Colonel Digby Willoughby, conducted a daring rescue operation from the royal palace. The prince witnessed firsthand the fragility of political stability and the critical importance of loyalty, leadership, and security. His father never forgot that day, and neither did the young prince. The experience would leave an indelible impression on his view of sovereignty, internal threats, and the necessity of strong military partnerships. With tensions still simmering between Brunei and neighboring Malaysia in 1963, Hassanal Bolkiah returned home to continue his education at Sultan Omar Ali Saifuddien College. It was a time of regional instability, and the choice reflected not only his father's protective instincts, but also a growing awareness that Brunei would need its next ruler to be fully immersed in local affairs. In July 1965, at the age of 19, the Crown Prince married his first cousin, Pengiran Anak Saleha. The marriage was a traditional one, designed to preserve the lineage and reinforce bonds within the royal family. The wedding was celebrated with great pomp within the royal palace, a symbol of continuity and heritage. Yet the prince's education was not complete. In January 1966, he embarked on one of the most significant chapters of his preparation for leadership by enrolling at the Royal Military Academy Sandhurst in the United Kingdom. It was a bold move, an effort to instill military discipline, broaden his worldview, and expose him to international standards of leadership. There he studied a diverse curriculum: English, mathematics, science, military science, and international affairs, with a particular focus on Russia and technical development. Sandhurst challenged the Crown Prince physically and mentally. He was no longer shielded by his royal status. Cadets were expected to perform equally, and merit was the sole basis of advancement. Here, he embraced values that would become central to his governance: responsibility, punctuality, self-discipline, and dedication. On 1st March 1968, he graduated as an honorary captain in the Coldstream Guards, another rite of passage in the transformation from prince to ruler. By the time he returned home, events had already set in motion a transition of historic significance. His father, Sultan Omar Ali Saifuddien III, had begun laying plans for abdication, intending to pass the throne to his son. The boy who had once studied quietly in the Sarau now stood at the threshold of royal power. Brunei's next chapter would be written under the stewardship of a young man forged through tradition, education, duty, and destiny. Part 2. Proclamation and Coronation. The Rise of a Modern Sultan. In the waning days of 1967, a decision of profound historical consequence was quietly unfolding behind the closed doors of Brunei's royal palace. Sultan Omar Ali Saifuddien III, who had guided the nation through critical modernizing reforms and emerging regional tensions, resolved to abdicate the throne. At the age of 53 and after 17 years of reign, the monarch sought to entrust the future of the Sultanate to his eldest son, Crown Prince Hassanal Bolkiah. It was a decision both bold and symbolic, a rare and peaceful transfer of absolute power at a time when many monarchies in the world were facing decline or collapse. On the evening of 4th of October 1967, Bruneians across the country tuned into Radio Brunei for what would become one of the most momentous broadcasts in the nation's history. Pangeran Pemanca Anak Haji Muhammad Alam, the chief of Adat Istiadat Negara, formally announced Sultan Omar Ali Saifuddin's abdication in favor of Crown Prince Hassanal Bolkiah. The announcement echoed across Brunei and was met with surprise and solemn awe, quickly becoming known as the Peristiwa 4 October, the 4th October event. It marked a new era for the tiny but strategically important oil-rich Sultanate. At just 21 years of age, the young Crown Prince returned from his military studies abroad to assume the full mantle of leadership. On the afternoon of 5th October 1967, inside the ceremonial Balai Singgasana, throne hall of Istana Darul Hana, he was proclaimed Sultan Hassanal Bolkiah Muizzaddin Wadullah, the 29th Sultan in a dynasty that stretched back over 6 centuries. The Grand Hall resounded with chants of allegiance as state dignitaries, wazirs, members of the Chetaria nobility, the acting Menteri Besar, and members of the Legislative Council gathered to witness the official proclamation. The atmosphere was rich with ritual and symbolism, steeped in centuries of Malay and Islamic royal traditions. During his first taita, a royal speech delivered in a calm but resolute tone, Sultan Hassanal Bolkiah assured the nation of his unwavering commitment to peace, prosperity, and continuity. I, as Sultan of Negara Brunei Darussalam, would endeavor to carry out the policies of my dear father, he declared, and would always safeguard and preserve the peace, tranquility, and prosperity of the country. The message was clear. Although Brunei was entering a new era, it would do so grounded in continuity, reverence for tradition, and unity under monarchy. Although his father had abdicated, he did not retire into obscurity. Instead, Sultan Omar Ali Saifuddien III adopted the honorific title Paduka Seri Begawan Sultan, becoming the respected elder statesman and father of independence. His continued presence provided an anchoring influence in the early years of the new sultan's rule. The queen consort, Pengiran Anak Damat, similarly adopted the title Paduka Suri Seri Begawan. This arrangement helped to ensure stability and lent a sense of shared stewardship between the generations. 6 months after the proclamation, preparations for a full coronation ceremony reached their crescendo. On 8 January 1968, the acting Menteri Besar announced over national radio that the coronation of Sultan Hassanal Bolkiah would be held on 1 August 1968. The announcement triggered a wave of excitement and ceremonial activity across the nation. Red and yellow flags, the royal colors of Brunei, were hoisted on Bukit Sungai Kebun and Bukit Panggal, two hills associated with coronation traditions. The air was thick with anticipation and pride. The grand occasion finally arrived. On 1 August 1968, the capital of Brunei came alive with festivity. Residents and visitors crowded into Bandar Seri Begawan Central District, hoping to glimpse their young sultan during this momentous ritual. Access to the city was tightly restricted except for official vehicles, underscoring the scale and importance of the event. At the Lapao, the newly built Royal Ceremonial Hall, dignitaries from neighboring countries and the broader international community gathered to witness the continuation of one of Asia's oldest monarchies. The Sultan arrived in regal splendor, transported first by his new 6-door Mercedes-Benz 600 Pullman Landaulet, with its roof open to allow the crowd a view of their sovereign. Following the traditional ablution rites at the palace, he was then conveyed in the Usangan Diraja, royal chariot, a magnificent gilded vehicle carved from 26 wooden panels and inlaid with 24-karat gold and precious stones. The 85-foot-long chariot was pulled by 50 soldiers of the Royal Brunei Malay Regiment, selected specifically for the task. Dressed in ceremonial red and gold, glistening with medals and honors, the Sultan took his place at the center of attention. The climax of the event came when his father, the retired Sultan, solemnly placed the royal crown upon his son's head and handed him the Keris Sinaga, a symbolic blade representing supreme power. In return, Omar Ali Saifuddien removed his own ceremonial saber and pledged loyalty to his son as both head of state and of religion. This symbolic gesture was then echoed by the assembled nobility and royal siblings, affirming their unity under the new sovereign. The Sultan made sacred vows to preserve peace, safeguard Islam, and uplift the lives of Brunei's people through progressive development. It was a promise not of absolute power, but of responsible rule, rooted in tradition, yet oriented toward the future. As his procession made its way through the cheering crowds, young school children lined the route, enthusiastically shouting, "Daulat Tuanku! Long live the king!" It was an unforgettable image of a leader beloved not simply for his title, but for what he represented to his nation. International guests in attendance included Prime Minister Lee Kuan Yew of Singapore, Tunku Abdul Rahman of Malaysia, and the British High Commissioner to Brunei, Arthur Adair, who represented Queen Elizabeth II. Their presence highlighted Brunei's regional and diplomatic importance, even before it achieved full independence. To mark the occasion, Brunei issued commemorative stamps and minted the coronation medal, honoring the moment as one of historical significance. As the sun set on that gilded day, Brunei had not only crowned a monarch, it had affirmed its ancient identity while quietly preparing for its modern transformation. Sultan Hassanal Bolkiah's coronation was not merely a ceremony, it was a powerful national reaffirmation that tradition and progress could coexist beneath the golden parasol of monarchy. Part 3. The young sovereign and the shadow of his father. With the golden crown freshly placed upon his head and the sacred Keris Sinaga clutched in hand, Sultan Hassanal Bolkiah stepped into power under the gaze of both his people and his father, the revered Paduka Seri Begawan, Sultan Omar Ali Saifuddien III. Though formally abdicated, the elder sultan continued to cast a long and influential shadow across the political landscape of Brunei. It was a unique dynamic, a young sovereign assuming leadership while the former ruler remained a powerful figure behind the scenes, guiding his son with wisdom and measured caution. At just 21 years old, the new sultan was still navigating the intricacies of state governance. While he had undergone elite military training at Sandhurst and had received a comprehensive education in English and Malay institutions, the task of ruling an absolute monarchy required far more than intellectual preparedness or ceremonial legitimacy. It demanded diplomatic sensitivity, political shrewdness, and an acute awareness of both domestic affairs and international developments. Recognizing this, the Sultan leaned heavily on the advice of his father during the initial years of his reign. This partnership between father and son was a balancing act. While Sultan Hassanal Bolkiah was the face of national leadership and bore the full constitutional title and authority, many of the most consequential decisions, especially in foreign policy and defense, were shaped in close consultation with the elder sultan. In his first taita after coronation, the young monarch acknowledged his father's enduring presence in the background of national governance. "I will carry out my duties in accordance with the policies of my beloved father," he declared, signaling not only his deference, but also a pledge to uphold continuity. Behind this continuity, however, lay a growing tension between Brunei's traditional governance model and the pressures for political modernization. The 1959 Constitution of Brunei had established the Sultan as head of state with full executive authority. This was further strengthened by the state of emergency declared in 1962 following the Brunei Revolt, which granted the Sultan sweeping emergency powers. The challenge now was how to navigate a world increasingly defined by democracy and international norms while preserving Brunei's unique political structure. The British government, still responsible for Brunei's foreign affairs and defense under the 1959 agreement, was pressing the Sultanate toward a future as a constitutional monarchy with democratic institutions. Brunei's leaders, however, were cautious. Both Hassanal Bolkiah and his father were deeply concerned about the nation's readiness for full independence. Their anxiety was not unfounded. Brunei, though oil-rich, had a small population, a developing infrastructure, and no formal military capable of defending its borders without external assistance. In early 1968, Sultan Hassanal Bolkiah and his father met British officials, including Malcolm MacDonald and George Thompson. During these talks, they expressed grave concerns about the British military withdrawal from Southeast Asia and its potential ramifications for Brunei's security. They feared the growing communist influence in the region and the instability of newly formed nations. For Brunei, full sovereignty seemed more a threat than a gift unless adequate safeguards were in place. It was against this tense backdrop that the young Sultan embarked on a series of diplomatic missions to London between 1968 and 1970. These visits were not symbolic state visits. They were high-stakes negotiations for Brunei's political future. Hassanal Bolkiah, often accompanied by his brother Prince Mohammed Bolkiah and trusted officials, pressed British leaders to allow for a more gradual path toward independence. A central point of contention was the continued stationing of British Gurkha troops in Brunei and the extent of British responsibility for foreign affairs beyond 1970. The British Labour government, firm in its commitment to decolonization, was reluctant to offer concessions. Hassanal Bolkiah returned from several rounds of talks without success. The situation grew more urgent as the 1959 agreement's provisions were set to expire in 1970. In a particularly pointed statement during negotiations, the Sultan remarked, "Even if half the male population were to join the armed forces, Brunei would not be able to defend itself." It was a candid admission of the strategic vulnerability facing his tiny nation. But the tides of British politics soon shifted. The election of the Conservative Party under Edward Heath opened the door for renewed dialogue. In 1971, the Sultan and his delegation finally secured a favorable outcome, the signing of the Brunei-British Friendship Agreement. Under this new framework, Brunei was granted full internal self-governance, while the British retained responsibility for defense and foreign affairs. It was, in effect, a semi-independent status that balanced Brunei's desire for sovereignty with its need for security. That same year, Sultan Hassanal Bolkiah, now aged 25, was appointed Inspector General of the Royal Brunei Police Force, RBPF, and General of the Royal Brunei Malay Regiment, RBMR. These appointments were not merely ceremonial. They symbolized his deepening role as a hands-on ruler, directly engaged in the military and civil institutions of the state. Colonel John Simpson, the RBMR's British commander, described the appointments as a meaningful gesture to strengthen the bond between the armed forces and the monarchy. While foreign policy and defense remained a major focus, Sultan Hassanal Bolkiah was simultaneously becoming more involved in domestic development. He worked with his father on shaping Brunei's national development plans, ambitious roadmaps aimed at transforming the country from a primarily oil-dependent state into a diversified economy with strong infrastructure and public services. Under his watch, education, healthcare, and transport saw significant investment, laying the foundation for Brunei's future prosperity. The bond between father and son, between predecessor and ruler, remained strong and mutually respectful. Omar Ali Saifuddien, now known affectionately as the Begawan Sultan, remained a source of guidance until his passing in 1986. His presence during the early years of Sultan Hassanal Bolkiah's reign ensured a smooth transition and provided an unbroken thread of stability for the nation. But as the 1970s advanced, the young Sultan was no longer just the inheritor of a legacy. He was beginning to shape his own. The boy prince who had once studied quietly in Surau and marched in cadet uniforms at Victoria Institution had now become the architect of a modern Brunei. The cautious and observant youth matured into a sovereign who understood that balancing tradition with modern statecraft required patience, pragmatism, and, above all, a steady hand on the tiller. Part 4. Steering the Nation, Brunei's Path Toward Independence. As the 1970s progressed, Sultan Hassanal Bolkiah emerged from the long shadow of his father's counsel and began to assert a more distinct and confident leadership. He was no longer the young monarch guided by an experienced predecessor. He was now the chief architect of Brunei's destiny. In the midst of a rapidly changing Southeast Asia, the Sultan embarked on a delicate balancing act, modernizing his nation, preserving its royal heritage, and gradually preparing it for the monumental leap toward full independence. The oil boom of the 1970s had filled Brunei's coffers, but the Sultan sought to channel these revenues into long-term investments in infrastructure, education, and social welfare. Under his guidance, the government rolled out a series of national development plans, each more ambitious than the last. The Third National Development Plan, RKN3, which spanned from 1975 to 1979 with a budget of $500 million, marked the beginning of this transformative era. It emphasized employment generation and laid the groundwork for diversifying the economy by investing in agriculture and light industry. While the oil sector continued to dominate national revenues, the Sultan's focus was now on creating a more self-sufficient and sustainable Bruneian economy. This vision deepened with the Fourth National Development Plan, RKN4, between 1980 and 1984, which expanded its reach with a budget of $2.2 billion. Social advancement, education, healthcare, and cultural initiatives received greater attention. The plan was emblematic of the Sultan's belief in a holistic model of governance, one where economic growth had to be accompanied by a rising standard of living, cultural preservation, and strong national identity. His policies were paternalistic but forward-looking, often framed through the lens of duty rather than power. Yet amid all the domestic transformation, Brunei remained a British protectorate, still tethered to colonial arrangements in foreign affairs and defense. Although the 1971 Friendship Agreement had granted internal self-rule, it was not full sovereignty. This arrangement, though beneficial for security, had begun to wear thin, especially as many of Brunei's neighbors had already achieved full independence and were asserting themselves on the world stage. In the late 1970s, Sultan Hassanal Bolkiah took decisive steps to complete Brunei's journey toward nationhood. In 1978, he led a new mission to London to initiate direct negotiations with the British government. His message was resolute. Brunei was ready to take its place among the independent nations of the world. The negotiations culminated in the signing of the Treaty of Friendship and Cooperation between Brunei and the United Kingdom on the 7th of January, 1979. This landmark agreement formalized the plan for full Bruneian independence by 1st January 1984. The treaty maintained Britain's role in offering military assistance if needed, but ended its authority over Brunei's foreign policy. For the Sultan, this moment signified not only the conclusion of decades of British oversight, but the fulfillment of his father's and his own vision for a sovereign Brunei, rooted in Malay Islamic traditions, yet positioned for global engagement. As the date for independence drew near, the Sultan focused on preparing the internal machinery of governance. He began assuming more direct control over state portfolios. On 23 February 1984, shortly after independence, he took over the role of Minister of Finance, signaling his intent to oversee Brunei's economic future with personal attention. He had previously served in this capacity from 1984 to 1986, before briefly passing the post to his younger brother, Prince Geoffrey Bolkiah, only to resume it in 1997 following financial controversies. The dissolution of the Legislative Council, LegCo, in 1977 marked another key turning point. Though the 1959 Constitution allowed for a legislative body, its powers had been suspended since the 1962 revolt. The Sultan approved its formal dissolution and reconstitution in December 1977, only to dissolve it again the very next day. This demonstrated the enduring preference for centralized, monarch-led governance, even as preparations for independence were underway. Then came the night of 31st December 1983. As the clock in Bandar Seri Begawan approached midnight, anticipation gripped the country. Dignitaries gathered at the newly completed Istana Nurul Iman, the Sultan's opulent new palace and one of the largest royal residences in the world. The Sultan, dressed in ceremonial attire, stepped forward to deliver the Declaration of Independence. Whereas, the time has now arrived when Brunei Darussalam will resume full international responsibility as a sovereign and independent nation in the community of nations. It was a solemn and emotional proclamation, steeped in gratitude to God and to the Bruneian people. For the first time in its modern history, Brunei stood as a fully independent nation. The next day, 1st January 1984, was marked with celebrations and symbolism. The Sultan assumed full leadership not only as head of state, but also as Prime Minister, Minister of Defense, Minister of Finance, and Minister of Home Affairs. He declared the national philosophy of Malayu Islam Baraja, Malay Islamic monarchy, a doctrine that emphasized the intertwining of Malay identity, Islamic values, and monarchical leadership. It was both a political ideology and a cultural affirmation, aimed at fortifying Brunei's unique identity in a globalizing world. The Sultan's independence speech also included a powerful religious message. He acknowledged that independence was not just a political right, but a divine blessing, bestowed upon Brunei through faith, unity, and historical continuity. He stressed that freedom must be matched with responsibility, and that the values of Islam, traditional governance, and national solidarity would serve as the nation's moral compass. To mark the occasion, Brunei released a series of commemorative stamps, medals, and public festivities. Streets were decorated with national flags and portraits of the Sultan. Public buildings were lit up, and a jubilant parade wound through the capital. Foreign leaders sent congratulations, and Brunei was formally welcomed into the international community. The country became a member of ASEAN and the United Nations that same year, further cementing its sovereign status. Yet for all the celebrations, the Sultan did not allow the euphoria to distract from his responsibilities. That same year, he re-established and once again dissolved the LegCo, underscoring that political power remained firmly centralized in the monarchy. But he also made a remarkable gesture of global goodwill. A donation of $210,000 to the United Nations International School in New York in honor of Brunei's first year of UN membership and the 40th anniversary of the World Body. Thus, The man who had inherited the throne in a quiet transfer of power in 1967 had, within less than 2 decades, transformed himself into the sovereign of a fully independent nation. Sultan Hassanal Bolkiah had proven himself a steady navigator through turbulent political waters. With unwavering discipline and strategic foresight, he had shepherded Brunei to its independence, preserving its heritage, its monarchy, and its stability along the way. Part 5, A Kingdom Built on Wealth, Development, Prestige, and the Silver Jubilee. In the years following Brunei's independence in 1984, Sultan Hassanal Bolkiah found himself standing at the helm of a nation flush with oil wealth and brimming with potential. With full sovereign authority, the Sultan undertook the challenge of nation-building not through revolution or democracy, but through careful orchestration of economic growth, cultural reinforcement, and royal stewardship. His absolute rule, rare in the modern world, was framed as a benevolent guardianship rooted in faith, tradition, and prosperity. The Sultan had long understood the significance of national planning in steering the trajectory of Brunei. Having inherited not only his father's throne, but also his meticulous planning instincts, Hassanal Bolkiah took direct oversight of the nation's development agenda. The post-independence years marked an unprecedented period of national investment and transformation, largely funded by Brunei's vast petroleum revenues. The Sixth National Development Plan, RKN6, launched in 1991 with a budget of $5.5 billion, focused on enhancing the quality of life for citizens and boosting economic diversification. The government invested heavily in infrastructure, telecommunications, public health systems, and housing projects. Schools, mosques, and hospitals emerged across the landscape, each structure a physical manifestation of the Sultan's commitment to his people's well-being. Following that, the Seventh National Development Plan, RKN7, part of a broader 20-year strategic vision initiated in 1985, was rolled out in 1996 with an even more ambitious budget of $7.2 billion. This plan emphasized sustainable growth and sought to reduce the country's over-reliance on oil and gas. Brunei began exploring industries such as halal food production, Islamic banking, and tourism, each tied closely to the Sultan's vision of a Malay Islamic monarchy grounded in cultural identity and religious values. To lead these economic reforms from the front, Sultan Hassanal Bolkiah resumed the portfolio of Minister of Finance in February 1997, a role he had initially held during Brunei's early independence. By directly overseeing national finances, he could ensure that Brunei's wealth was safeguarded and strategically deployed. His approach to governance remained personal, centralized, and symbolic of the intimate bond he claimed with his people as ruler, benefactor, and guardian. As Brunei entered the 1990s, the Sultan's leadership reached a symbolic high point, the silver jubilee of his accession to the throne. The year 1992 marked 25 years since his proclamation as Sultan, and the government spared no expense in commemorating the milestone. More than $200 million was reportedly spent on a series of grand-scale celebrations, underscoring both Brunei's immense wealth and its desire to solidify national pride under monarchical rule. Among the commemorative projects was the construction of a 6,000-seat mosque with a gold dome, 21 fully furnished guest houses for visiting dignitaries, an expansive exhibition center, and the purchase of 200 new Mercedes-Benz vehicles to transport official guests in style. These projects, while criticized by some observers as lavish, were defended domestically as fitting tributes to the legacy of the monarchy and Brunei's growing international stature. A key legacy of the Silver Jubilee was the transformation of the Churchill Memorial Building, a vestige of Brunei's colonial ties, into the Royal Regalia Building, a museum dedicated to the monarchy and the life of Sultan Hassanal Bolkiah. There, visitors could view the Sultan's coronation attire, royal chariots, and priceless gifts from global leaders. The message was clear. Brunei was no longer a protectorate, it was a sovereign kingdom led by a monarch with unchallenged legitimacy and global recognition. The Sultan's subjects, too, played their part in the Jubilee's festivities. The people of Kuala Belait gifted the Silver Jubilee Park, a scenic recreational area on the banks of the Balait River that remains a landmark and tourist attraction to this day. Public spaces, adorned with fountains, floral arrangements, and royal banners, became gathering places for citizens to honor their monarch. A state banquet at the opulent Istana Nurul Iman, the Sultan's sprawling palace, crowned the celebrations. Dignitaries from across the globe attended, including Yang di Pertuan Agong Azlan Shah and Raja Permaisuri Tuanku Bainun of Malaysia, Prince Edward of the United Kingdom, and representatives from all of Brunei's neighboring monarchies. The Sultan, dressed in a dazzling yellow robe and surrounded by his 2 wives and 10 children, addressed the nation in a brief but moving speech. My late father's policies, particularly in safeguarding peace, increasing the standard of living of the people and the prosperity of the country, as well as upholding Islam, he said, acknowledging the foundation on which his reign was built and the values he sought to preserve. The Jubilee was not just a celebration of a ruler's longevity, it was a reaffirmation of Brunei's governing philosophy, the union of religion, monarchy, and Malay culture. In conjunction with the Silver Jubilee, the Sultan announced the formation of the Sultan Haji Hassanal Bolkiah Foundation, Yayasan Sultan Haji Hassanal Bolkiah, YSHB. This philanthropic body was intended to channel royal wealth into key areas such as welfare, religion, education, and national development. It served as a public demonstration of the Sultan's role not only as a ruler, but as a charitable steward of Brunei's fortune. Simultaneously, the Sultan ensured that symbols of loyalty and honor were extended to the people in the state's elite. A new Silver Jubilee medal, Pingat Jubilee Perak, was introduced in 3 classes, gold, silver, and bronze, and awarded to individuals in recognition of their service to the nation. The nation's civil servants, soldiers, and ordinary citizens found themselves included in a narrative that linked personal sacrifice to national identity and royal continuity. But beneath the pomp and celebration, the Sultan remained acutely aware of the changing world beyond Brunei's borders. The global economy was becoming more interconnected, and Islamic revivalism was on the rise across the Muslim world. Balancing Brunei's insular stability with a need for strategic international engagement would become the Sultan's next great challenge. Still, as the curtain fell on the Silver Jubilee year, Sultan Hassanal Bolkiah stood at the height of his power and prestige. He was not only Brunei's longest-reigning monarch, but one of the world's few remaining absolute rulers, commanding wealth, loyalty, and a carefully cultivated national philosophy. The Silver Jubilee had not merely honored the man, it had fortified the monarchy as the bedrock of the Bruneian state. Part 6, Stability and Strain. The Road to the New Millennium. As Brunei advanced into the final decade of the 20th century, Sultan Hassanal Bolkiah presided over a country widely regarded as one of the most stable and prosperous in Southeast Asia. With its oil-fueled economy, generous welfare state, and well-preserved cultural traditions, Brunei was often described as an island of tranquility in a turbulent region. Yet beneath the polished surface of prosperity and royal pageantry, strains were emerging, both within the royal household and in the structure of the absolute monarchy that underpinned Brunei's political identity. The Sultan continued his direct involvement in government, holding multiple ministerial portfolios. His economic policies focused on maintaining financial discipline and expanding non-oil sectors of the economy. The 8th National Development Plan, RKN-8, and later the 9th, RKN-9, and 10th, RKN-10, plans reinforced national goals of economic diversification, education reform, and technological innovation. Emphasis was placed on reducing unemployment, increasing national productivity, and promoting Brunei's role in Islamic finance and halal product industries. Still, for all the investments and policy initiatives, the Sultan's firm control over political life remained largely unchallenged. The Legislative Council, LECO, suspended for decades, was only briefly reinstated before being dissolved again. For many Bruneians, this lack of democratic development was not seen as a failure, but rather a continuation of the paternalistic model that had ensured stability and security since independence. However, in 2004, a symbolic change occurred. After a 21-year hiatus, the Sultan reopened the Legco with new provisions under an amended constitution. While the council had no real legislative power, it included appointed members and some indirect public representation, reflecting an effort to project the appearance of participatory governance while maintaining centralized control. Proposals to allow 15 of the 45 seats to be elected were floated but never implemented, and by the end of 2007, elections had still not taken place. The Internal Security Act, ISA, remained in place, preserving the Sultan's ability to govern by decree. In 2006, the Sultan went further, formally amending the constitution to render himself infallible under Bruneian law. This unprecedented legal status cemented his authority and guaranteed legal immunity, effectively placing the monarchy beyond reproach in any domestic legal framework. Though controversial abroad, the move was largely unchallenged within Brunei and signaled the continued intertwining of the Sultan's person with the machinery of the state. Despite his public image as a stable and revered monarch, Sultan Hassanal Bolkiah's family was embroiled in one of the most scandalous financial crises in modern royal history. At the heart of it was his younger brother, Prince Jeffrey Bolkiah, who had served as Brunei's finance minister and head of the Brunei Investment Agency, BIA, a sovereign wealth fund managing tens of billions in oil-generated assets. In the late 1990s, investigations revealed that vast sums, amounting to over $14 billion, had been diverted from the national treasury through Prince Jeffrey's personal companies and luxury ventures, collectively known under the Amadeo Development Corporation. Lavish purchases ranging from private yachts, rare artworks, exotic cars, hotels, and even amusement parks were traced back to Jeffrey's complex network of financial dealings. The Sultan, known for his firm sense of royal discipline, acted decisively. By 1998, the Amadeo Group collapsed under the weight of its debts. The Sultan removed his brother from all official positions, and the Bruneian government launched a global legal campaign to recover state assets. In 2000, a settlement agreement was signed, but litigation continued as Prince Jeffrey allegedly failed to meet its terms. The case escalated through courts in London, the Cayman Islands, and the United States. The Privy Council in the UK, acting as Brunei's highest court of appeal, ultimately ruled against Jeffrey and ordered the return of more than 500 properties, including 2,500 luxury cars, 9 aircraft, and numerous artworks. The legal and public fallout from the case raised questions abroad about transparency, royal finances, and the separation between personal wealth and state funds. Domestically, however, the Sultan's swift action and recovery of assets largely preserved his reputation. The narrative that emerged was one of a monarch defending the nation's integrity, even at the cost of disciplining his own family. As Brunei entered the 21st century, Sultan Hassanal Bolkiah continued to refine his national vision. The concept of Melayu Islam Baraja, MIB, was not just a slogan, it was the framework by which state ideology, legal policy, and cultural life were aligned. To further emphasize the Islamic character of the state, the Sultan began to steer Brunei toward a more conservative interpretation of Islamic law. In 2014, after years of preparation, the Sultan announced the implementation of a Sharia Penal Code, marking the beginning of a gradual but profound shift in Brunei's legal system. The move was presented as a religious obligation and a national duty, though it sparked significant controversy internationally. Punishments including amputation, flogging, and stoning for certain crimes were introduced in stages, drawing condemnation from human rights groups, governments, and public figures worldwide. The Sultan remained unapologetic. In public speeches, he dismissed never-ending theories about harshness and instead described the Sharia implementation as a must in accordance with divine law. While many in Brunei accepted the reforms as an extension of MIB principles, the laws caused alarm abroad and ignited calls for boycotts of Brunei-owned luxury properties. especially hotels in the Dorchester collection, which included iconic establishments in London, Paris, and Beverly Hills. In the face of international pressure, the Sultan issued a moratorium on the death penalty, including stoning in 2019. He also pledged to ratify the United Nations Convention Against Torture, a move seen as an attempt to alleviate global backlash. Yet the legal framework of Sharia remained intact, underscoring the Sultan's vision of Brunei as an Islamic monarchy guided not by secular democracy, but by faith and royal tradition. Despite controversy, Hassanal Bolkiah maintained his role as a global statesman. He continued to chair ASEAN summits, host foreign dignitaries, and sign trade and diplomatic agreements with countries ranging from Japan and Singapore to Saudi Arabia and China. He expanded air connectivity, signed energy cooperation deals, and supported multilateral engagements in regional and global forums. At the United Nations General Assembly, he reiterated Brunei's commitment to peaceful coexistence, sustainable development, and the rule of law, albeit through a distinct Bruneian lens. As the millennium dawned, Sultan Hassanal Bolkiah had successfully navigated Brunei through 3 decades of transformation. He had guided the country from colonial protectorate to oil-rich monarchy, weathered internal scandals, defended his vision of a faith-driven state, and preserved the monarchy as the unshakable pillar of national life. But new challenges loomed ahead. Economic shifts, social expectations, and global scrutiny would test the resilience of Brunei's absolute monarchy in ways that no coronation speech or development plan could fully anticipate. Part 7. Faith, Family, and the Golden Jubilee. Royal Power in the 21st Century. As Brunei moved deeper into the 21st century, Sultan Hassanal Bolkiah remained the unchallenged fulcrum around which the nation revolved. In a world increasingly defined by constitutional constraints and democratic institutions, his rule stood out as one of the last remaining absolute monarchies. A system where a single individual held near total authority over the executive, legislative, and religious life of the nation. In Brunei, this concentration of power was not merely tolerated, but deeply woven into the national identity through the guiding principle of Melayu Islam Beraja, Malay Islamic monarchy. Yet this royal model was not static. In his 7th decade of life, the Sultan skillfully adapted tradition to modern expectations, continuing his philanthropic initiatives, refining his government structure, and reaffirming his religious commitments in an era of growing conservatism. By 2017, Sultan Hassanal Bolkiah had sat on the throne for half a century. In that remarkable span of time, he had overseen Brunei's evolution from a sleepy British protectorate into one of the world's richest countries per capita, with top-tier education and health services provided free of charge to its citizens. To mark this extraordinary legacy, the Sultan's government organized a series of jubilant events culminating in the Golden Jubilee of his accession to the throne, one of the most elaborate royal celebrations in modern Asian history. The Golden Jubilee began on 5 October 2017, 50 years to the day after the Sultan's proclamation. From early morning, more than 80,000 citizens gathered outside the Istana Nurul Iman, the world's largest residential palace, braving low-lying clouds and tropical heat to witness the milestone. The mood was one of reverence and national pride as Bruneians waved flags and chanted, "Daulat ke bawa Duli Tuan Patik," long live the king. In a grand royal procession through the heart of Bandar Seri Begawan, the Sultan rode in his ornate Usungan Diraja, royal chariot, accompanied by his sons, including Crown Prince Al-Muhtadi Billah, Princess Abdul Azim, Abdul Malik, Abdul Mateen, and Abdul Wakil, and his daughter Princess Rashida Sadatul Bolkiah. The route was lined with thousands of well-wishers, who caught glimpses of the Sultan and his family waving from the open-air platform. The chariot was pulled by 50 elite soldiers dressed in black ceremonial garb, emphasizing the enduring connection between the monarchy and the military. The palace itself hosted formal audiences, with the Sultan and Queen Consort Raja Isteri Pengiran Anak Saleha seated upon golden thrones. A 21-gun salute echoed across the capital, adding further gravitas to the historic event. Visiting heads of state and dignitaries from neighboring countries, including Prime Ministers Lee Hsien Loong of Singapore, Najib Razak of Malaysia, Hun Sen of Cambodia, and Joko Widodo of Indonesia, paid tribute to the Sultan's longevity and leadership. Even Prince Edward and his wife Sophie, representing the British royal family, made a special appearance, an echo of the historical bond between Brunei and the United Kingdom. True to his style, the Sultan used the occasion not just for ceremony, but for introspection. In his Golden Jubilee speech, he described the day as the most historic for himself and the nation, and spoke of the reciprocal responsibility between ruler and people. He reaffirmed the monarchy's role in ensuring stability, security, and religious guidance, while calling on citizens to remain loyal, disciplined, and united. The underlying theme was one of continuity, of the Sultan as both father of the nation and servant to its people. As part of the Jubilee commemorations, the government launched several landmark infrastructure projects. Among the most symbolic was the Raja Isteri Pengiran Anak Haja Saleha Bridge, inaugurated on 14th October 2017. The stunning cable-stayed structure linked key parts of the capital and was named in honor of the Queen Consort. It stood as a testament to Brunei's infrastructural progress and national unity, underscoring the royal family's continued influence in shaping the physical and symbolic landscape of the country. Another highlight was the opening of the Eco Corridor Park on 22nd October, an urban green space along the Brunei River designed to promote environmental consciousness and public health. These projects, though seemingly apolitical, reflected the Sultan's long-standing belief in development as both a physical and moral good. In tandem with these material commemorations, the Golden Jubilee Medal was introduced in 3 distinct classes and awarded to individuals who had contributed significantly to national service. It was not just a token of royal favor, but a means of integrating the monarchy deeper into the fabric of public life and civic identity. Notably, the Royal Regalia Building was renamed the Royal Regalia Museum on 2nd December 2017. Its exhibition halls enhanced to reflect the full arc of the Sultan's 50-year reign. Inside, displays chronicled the early years of his leadership, his coronation, and the various national achievements that had marked each decade. For visitors, local and foreign alike, the museum offered a curated narrative of one man's reign interwoven with the destiny of an entire nation. While the Golden Jubilee was a time of festivity and reflection, the Sultan remained vigilant in exercising his political and spiritual role. In the face of global terrorism, shifting geopolitical alliances, and growing secularism, Hassanal Bolkiah continued to position Brunei as a fortress of conservative Islamic governance and national order. The Sharia Penal Code, while controversial, remained central to his platform, reinforcing the Sultan's image as a moral guardian. At the same time, the Sultan continued to invest in education, social services, and public health. He emphasized the cultivation of national unity, moral discipline, and the importance of religious observance as tools not only of spiritual fulfillment, but of social stability. His speeches became increasingly focused on the need for moral rejuvenation, especially among the youth, calling on them to embody the values of Bruneian identity, Islamic piety, and respect for the monarchy. By the end of 2017, Sultan Hassanal Bolkiah had become the world's longest-reigning living monarch and the longest-serving head of state. His reign had outlasted Cold War tensions, colonial withdrawals, economic crises, and global pandemics. In an age when monarchies across the world were reduced to ceremonial roles or overthrown entirely, he remained a living paradox, an absolute monarch in the heart of a globalized, democratic world. But as the Sultan basked in the glow of his Golden Jubilee, new challenges were already emerging on the horizon, from digital transparency and generational change to global health crises and shifting regional alliances. The next chapter of his reign would require not only wisdom and authority, but adaptability, resilience, and a vision capable of leading Brunei through the uncertainty of the future. Part 8. Trials of Leadership, Pandemic Response and Global Diplomacy. In the late 2010s, Sultan Hassanal Bolkiah entered what would become one of the most testing periods of his long reign, not just as a political leader, but as a moral and spiritual guide for his people. As the world grappled with rapid technological disruption, political polarization, and the erosion of traditional institutions, Brunei remained a bastion of calm. But even this oil-rich sultanate could not remain untouched by the global force that would define the early 2020s, the COVID-19 pandemic. When the first signs of the outbreak reached Southeast Asia in early 2020, the Bruneian government, under the Sultan's close supervision, moved swiftly. Sultan Hassanal Bolkiah, acting in his capacity as Prime Minister, Minister of Defense, Minister of Finance, and Minister of Foreign Affairs, coordinated one of the region's most rapid and decisive responses. Entry bans were quickly imposed on foreign nationals, public gatherings were suspended, and citizens returning from abroad were placed under mandatory quarantine in purpose-built facilities. The Sultan's leadership during this time was not only administrative, but deeply personal. In a rare display of direct engagement, he delivered speeches and messages to the public emphasizing the need for discipline, hygiene, and national unity. He framed the pandemic as not just a health emergency, but a moral trial, a moment for Bruneians, particularly Muslims, to renew their spiritual practices. He called upon his people to see the virus as a divine test, urging them to seek strength in prayer, charity, and social responsibility. "We must take care of our lives and health," he said during one of his broadcasts. "Our responsibility is not only to each other, but to God." His appeals resonated across the nation, where reverence for the monarchy remained strong. The Sultan's message blended public health guidance with religious overtones, instructing citizens to remain faithful, observe social distancing, and avoid panic. Friday prayers at mosques were temporarily suspended, a controversial move that was nevertheless accepted due to the Sultan's religious authority and clarity of vision. On the 1st April 2021, the Sultan himself received the first dose of the COVID-19 vaccine at Istana Nurul Iman. The act was symbolic, reinforcing public confidence in the national vaccination program. It also underscored the Sultan's approach to governance, leading not just by policy, but by personal example. Brunei's early handling of the pandemic was widely praised. The government provided financial support to businesses, extended medical services, and ensured food security across districts. The Sultan's reputation as a caring monarch was reinforced, with citizens posting messages of gratitude across social media, referring to him as Ayahanda, Father of the Nation. But the pandemic did not pause the Sultan's foreign diplomacy. Even as borders closed and summits went virtual, Hassanal Bolkiah remained active on the global stage. He chaired virtual ASEAN summits, coordinated regional pandemic responses, and issued statements advocating global vaccine equity. He continued to express Brunei's unwavering support for peaceful diplomacy, humanitarian assistance, and the rule of international law. One of the most symbolic diplomatic moments came on 19 September 2022, when the Sultan and his son, Prince Abdul Mateen, attended the state funeral of Queen Elizabeth II at Westminster Abbey in London. The gesture was steeped in historical significance, an acknowledgement of Brunei's enduring relationship with the British monarchy. As a sign of mourning and respect, the Sultan ordered national flags to be flown at half-mast across government buildings and diplomatic missions. Brunei's religious diplomacy also remained a central pillar of the Sultan's international engagements. At the ASEAN GCC Summit in October 2023, Sultan Hassanal Bolkiah spoke firmly on the humanitarian crisis in the Middle East. Calling for the cessation of violence and respect for international humanitarian law, he reaffirmed Brunei's support for a just resolution to the Palestinian issue. In a special message on the International Day of Solidarity with the Palestinian people, he reminded the world that the Palestine question remains unresolved, reinforcing Brunei's alignment with causes central to the Muslim world. To translate sentiment into action, the Sultan approved the establishment of two humanitarian initiatives in 2023: the National Committee for the Humanitarian Fund for Palestinians in Gaza and the Humanitarian Fund for Palestinians in Gaza 2023. These projects highlighted the Sultan's preference for quiet, strategic aid over performative diplomacy, delivering support in a way consistent with his deeply held religious beliefs and Brunei's measured foreign policy. At home, the Sultan continued to blend his dual identity as monarch and spiritual guide. During his National Day speech on 22nd February 2024, marking Brunei's 40th year of independence, he described national freedom as a gift from God, achievable only through unity, patriotism, and sacrifice. He acknowledged the contributions of previous generations and praised the RKN, National Development Plan, for its role in building a resilient and innovative society. True independence, he declared, is not just sovereignty, but the unity of spirit, the harmony of purpose, and the fulfillment of responsibility. This speech, like many others before it, reflected his consistent themes: loyalty to the monarchy, adherence to Islam, and belief in national unity as the path forward. Meanwhile, his diplomacy continued to foster international cooperation. His attendance at regional and global forums remained steady, with bilateral meetings enhancing Brunei's relationships with global powers like China, Japan, Singapore, and Saudi Arabia. From trade agreements and infrastructure partnerships to defense cooperation and educational exchange, Brunei, under Hassanal Bolkiah, quietly carved out a niche as a stable, neutral, and culturally confident actor in global affairs. In the face of extraordinary change, from pandemics and climate risks to evolving social values and digital disruption, Sultan Hassanal Bolkiah remained anchored in the pillars that had defined his reign: religious fidelity, royal duty, and national stability. To many in Brunei, he had become more than just a ruler. He was the nation's living symbol of resilience. Yet even as the Sultan neared 6 decades on the throne, the question of legacy became increasingly pertinent. With a new generation of Bruneians growing up in a digital connected world, and with global expectations for reform pressing more loudly, the monarchy's long-term continuity would depend not only on tradition, but on the capacity to evolve. Part 9, Legacy and Controversy. The final assessment of a reign. As Sultan Hassanal Bolkiah's reign moved beyond its 5th decade, the dual nature of his legacy became increasingly apparent. On one hand, he was celebrated as a ruler who had safeguarded peace, stewarded vast wealth into public infrastructure, and preserved Brunei's sovereignty and identity in an uncertain world. On the other, his rule was marked by severe limits on political freedoms, controversial laws, and internal family discord that periodically surfaced in global headlines. His personal wealth, estimated in the tens of billions, had long captured the world's attention. The Sultan resided in the opulent Istana Nurul Iman, a palace of over 2,000 rooms, reportedly the largest royal residence on earth. His automobile collection, once numbering over 2,500 vehicles, included rare Rolls-Royces, Ferraris, and custom-built Bentleys. Though such excesses were not uncommon among Gulf monarchs, they stood in stark contrast to the Sultan's austere image at home as a devout and fatherly figure. A particularly damaging scandal erupted in the late 1990s and early 2000s, involving his younger brother, Prince Jeffrey Bolkiah, then head of the Brunei Investment Agency, BIA. Accusations of massive embezzlement, extravagant purchases, including the acquisition of the luxury brand Asprey, amusement parks, yachts, and even a personal Boeing jet, led to prolonged litigation across multiple countries. The Bruneian government eventually sued Prince Jeffrey for misappropriating more than $14 billion in state funds. Though a settlement was reached and many assets were returned, the affair exposed the blurred lines between royal wealth and public resources. As Brunei lacked transparent financial institutions or free press, the extent of the damage could only be pieced together from foreign court records and leaked documents. Despite this, the Sultan emerged with his authority intact, casting himself as the guardian of state integrity, even against royal excess. Controversy also dogged the Sultan in the international human rights arena. In 2014, he enacted the Sharia Penal Code, which mandated punishments such as flogging, amputation, and death by stoning for crimes including adultery, theft, and homosexual acts. These punishments were to apply solely to Muslims and be implemented in phases. The move was consistent with the Sultan's emphasis on Malayu Islam Braja, but sparked global outrage. Celebrities, human rights organizations, and world leaders condemned the move. Prominent figures like George Clooney, Elton John, and Ellen DeGeneres called for a boycott of Brunei-owned properties, especially the luxurious Dorchester Collection hotels. International NGOs accused the Sultan of codifying inhumane punishments and violating international norms. Facing mounting global pressure, the Sultan announced in 2019 a moratorium on the death penalty, extending it to include the Sharia-prescribed punishments. He also promised to ratify the United Nations Convention Against Torture, a symbolic concession that sought to soften the backlash without repealing the core structure of the Penal Code. Nevertheless, the damage to Brunei's international image lingered. His government also banned public Christmas celebrations for Muslims in 2015, framing it as a move to protect Islamic beliefs. Though non-Muslims were allowed to celebrate in private, public displays such as Santa costumes and Christmas carols were prohibited in malls and government facilities. The Sultan's stance earned criticism from religious freedom advocates, but found little resistance at home, where the monarchy retained overwhelming public support. And yet, for every controversy, there was an equally compelling narrative of national achievement. The Sultan Haji Hassanal Bolkiah Foundation, established in 1992, became a major philanthropic force, offering aid in education, religious services, and disaster relief. Through its Sultan Scholar Program, Brunei sent its brightest students to prestigious universities abroad, cultivating a generation of elite professionals and bureaucrats loyal to the Sultanate's vision. As Supreme Commander of the Royal Brunei Armed Forces, RBADF, the Sultan also prioritized defense scholarships and military training abroad, particularly in the UK and Australia. His goal was clear: to mold a core of Bruneian officers with global exposure, yet grounded in Islamic values and loyalty to the crown. In his personal life, the Sultan was known for his love of polo, which he played competitively well into his 50s. He also enjoyed badminton and squash, reflecting a disciplined lifestyle that stood in contrast to some of his more flamboyant relatives. His marriages, however, drew public scrutiny. His second wife, Mariam Abdulaziz, a former flight attendant, was stripped of her royal titles following divorce in 2003. His third wife, Azerinaz Mazhar Hakim, was also divorced in 2010, likewise losing her royal titles. The Sultan fathered 5 sons and 7 daughters, with his eldest son, Prince Al-Muhtadi Billah, serving as crown prince and heir apparent. By the mid-2020s, Sultan Hassanal Bolkiah had become a fixture of global diplomacy and Islamic leadership. He continued to champion causes like Palestinian statehood, interfaith cooperation, and environmental sustainability. His speeches at ASEAN summits, United Nations sessions, and Islamic gatherings reflected a careful blend of religious conservatism and international moderation. At home, he remained the undisputed monarch, a figure who blended medieval power with modern statecraft. Bruneians referred to him with respect, reverence, and affection. Many credited him with providing peace, free healthcare, subsidized housing, and a high standard of living in exchange for their political acquiescence. In an age where many monarchies were reduced to ceremony, Sultan Hassanal Bolkiah stood not only as ruler, but as the sovereign architect of his nation's destiny. Now in his 70s and entering the twilight of his reign, the Sultan faced a question as profound as any he had encountered in his long career. What legacy would endure beyond his lifetime? Would he be remembered as the benevolent guardian who preserved Brunei's peace, identity, and prosperity in a fractured world? Or would history judge him more critically for the suppression of dissent, the centralization of power, and the enforcement of controversial religious laws? Perhaps the answer lies in the very paradox of his rule, A modern monarch who insisted on preserving the past. A sovereign who wielded absolute power with both paternal benevolence and unyielding authority. And a man who, for better or worse, became inseparable from the fate of his nation.